So on this channel we talk an awful lot about how to run faster, punch harder, lift heavier, come up with more awesome creative ideas. Unfortunately, the reality is that for the most part you're not going to have to use most of these skills. Gone are the days when we'd be challenged to a samurai sword fight in the street, unfortunately. I mean fortunately, unfortunately. Instead, these days most of our success comes down more to soft skills, things like persuasion, charisma, emotional IQ, sensitivity. These are the things that allow us to get on with other people, to persuade people to buy into our ideas, to climb the corporate ladder, and that's what's going to determine whether you're highly successful or whether you're kind of stuck in a rut. So I'm starting a video series looking at more of these kind of soft skills and psychological warfare so we can see how to manipulate people into doing our bidding, or something less crazy. And then if that doesn't work, then you can go and watch one of Grant's videos and learn how to kick their ass. Okay, so we're going to start with negotiation to get the outcome that you want in some kind of debate or discussion. So the obvious example of using negotiation would be trying to get a raise, or perhaps trying to increase your rates if you're a self-employed individual with your clients. However, there are many other scenarios where you're going to find yourself negotiating, whether that means negotiating in relationships, coming to some kind of compromise, or whether it means talking someone out of a hostage situation. Another very likely situation that I often find myself in.
Just do whatever he says! My life is in his hands! That was so much fun!
The first thing we need to do is to identify what our ideal outcome is, what we're trying to achieve with any negotiation. And contrary to popular belief, apart from in that hostage scenario, normally negotiation is about coming to a satisfying compromise where both parties are happy with the outcome, where both parties are receiving value, or at least they believe they are. This not only prevents you from souring that individual on doing future business with you, but it's also more likely to be successful for both of you. It's much easier to convince someone to do something that also benefits them than it is to convince them to do something that completely does not benefit them. So going into any negotiation, we first need to identify what would make us both happy. That's called the Zopa, or the zone of possible agreement. So if you're trying to increase your salary and get a raise, then that's going to be the range between the lowest that you're willing to accept and the maximum that they're willing to pay. And in most negotiations, the outcome is going to be a compromise somewhere in the middle there. Obviously, the closer it is to your end, the higher end, the more successful you've been in that negotiation. In fact, one technique used in negotiations often is the napkin technique. Here you both write down what your acceptable or ideal outcome would be. You write down what you'd be willing to accept, they write down what they'd be willing to pay, and then that gives you your Zopa and you can work from there. Doing a little bit of research before you go into a negotiation then can be really beneficial because it allows you to get a good idea of what's realistic, of what they're likely to accept. This might mean asking other people that work for this organization or individual how much they get paid, or it might mean benchmarking by looking at what other people who do your kind of work get paid. This is an example of pre-suasion. It's the preparation you do before a negotiation to put the odds in your favor, and there's lots of things you can do to accomplish this. One of the key things is just timing. If you're working for an organization that's really struggling, they're doing lots of layoffs, and you've just had a disciplinary hearing, then asking for a raise is unlikely to be successful. However, if you've just closed a massive deal, and if you know that your organization is just about to take on another huge client where you're going to be instrumental, then that's a great time to ask for a raise. Likewise, if you're negotiating with your other half and she's just come home from work, or he's just come home from work and he's angry and harassed, now's not a good time to tell them that you want to change your routine, or you want to fix your budget, or go on a big holiday, whatever. Wait until you're both in a good place, in a good mood, and then you're going to be more likely to get the outcome that you want. Sounds really obvious. A lot of people forget to do this. You can also prime this person and get them to be in a good mood. And in particular, you can get them to be in a good mood with you. So one way you might do this, for instance, is to, if you've got a boss, ask them how you've been performing lately. Ask them what you've done well. They'll then write back, I'm assuming you're going to do this by email, and say, here's what you've been doing really well, and yes, we're very satisfied with your performance. Now you ask for a raise. You've just asked them to think about all the things you've done really well. You've got them to tell you you're doing really well. It's now going to be much easier for them to agree to give you a raise. A, because they're in a good mood with you, because they've been focusing on all your good points, and B, because it's very hard for them to come up with a good reason not to give you a raise after they've just told you how good you are. Likewise, you can prime people by putting them in a good mood by giving them a nice cup of tea before you begin your discussion, or buying a nice piece of cake. Don't make this obvious, don't make it look like bribery. Instead, the aim is just to make them feel comfortable, put them in a good mood, because then they're more likely to be agreeable. In fact, some salespeople actually use oxytocin spray in order to biohack other people into becoming more agreeable. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do that, but of course you can get people to be more agreeable through the use of body language and building rapport, or even through lighting and music, and I'll talk more about body language in a future video. Similar example to this is to use the power of reciprocity, because basically when you give someone something or when someone does you a favor, it creates a powerful urge to reciprocate by doing the same back. In fact, it's human nature to want to do significantly more back for the other person, because their gesture to you seems to have more value because it came out of thin air, whereas yours is reciprocation. Therefore, in order to be seen as equally generous, you actually have to do more, and you feel uncomfortable until you do so. So if someone does something for you, then you're much more likely to then agree to them or let them get the upper hand in a subsequent negotiation. And you see this a lot in Europe and in the Middle East during haggling. If you ever try and buy something from a stall, they'll often give your kid or your sibling a free item of inexpensive jewelry or a fun gift, and that way you're now feeling in their debt and you're more likely to be willing to buy something from them for slightly more than you might even perceive it as being worth. Likewise, they might offer you a cup of tea. Believe it or not, you can be willing to spend 10, 20, 30% more just because someone gave you a really cheap cup of tea. A similar concept is something called anchoring, and here you're going to try and get the other person to think about a specific amount or a specific outcome that you want. So the example I was given is that if you go into a meeting where you're being told why you can't have 40k a year as your annual salary, it's very likely that you're going to walk out of that meeting with 40k, because that's what everyone's focusing on. That's the number we're all talking about. Everything's anchored around that number. It's very hard to get away from it. Once you're in the negotiation, if they say no to your original suggestion, the original amount that you want, then you need to try and find a compromise that you're both going to be happy with. Often then it's a good idea to have a target amount that you want to achieve and then a minimum amount that you fall back to, because that will then be much easier to get. And the example I was told is that of a Girl Scout selling cookies, and she might go door to door and say, "Hi Mr. or Mrs, would you please buy 10 boxes of cookies? It's for a good cause, and you know, I've been doing this all day and I haven't sold many cookies." And then the person at the door will say, "I'm really sorry, 10 is too much." And then she says, "Well, how about just buy one?" And of course, that seems like a great compromise, a win-win situation, which is what we're trying to achieve. Remember, they get to feel good, she gets money, and it's worked well because she's had a backup option. This also allows us to use something called contrast from psychology. Contrast means, of course, that you're offering two contrasting options, where one makes the other seem more extremely cheap or affordable. So say you go to a shop and you see a tie, and it's a luxury premium tie made from silk that costs $100, and then next to it is the everyday tie for $50. Now, $50 is still an awful lot of money for a tie, but because it's next to a tie that's $100, it suddenly seems like quite a good deal for a tie. Another good thing to do is to try and demonstrate how you're offering the value that you're asking for. And if you're self-employed like me, the way we do that is by saying, "I'm having to put up my rates, but don't worry because I'm going to offer this extra value." So as a writer, I might say, "I'll do an extra proofread," or "I'll do better formatting." And as a result, I'm having to put it up just this small amount. Everyone wins. Another way to do this is by asking for less, by having more negotiations where you are less ambitious. And this way, you can move up in small increments. So Milgram's study of obedience showed how you could get regular individuals to deliver fatal electric shocks to strangers simply by increasing the amount incrementally. This was possible partly because the researchers were wearing lab coats, thus creating a sense of authority, but also because the increments were so small that it didn't seem like anything. Delivering a 100-volt shock doesn't seem like that much when you've just delivered a 95-volt shock. What's an extra 5 volts going to do? The same thing goes with asking for a raise or asking for more money. You can slightly increase the amount. As a writer, I'll sometimes say, "Can I have an extra 0.1 of a cent per word?" which seems like nothing. So of course people will agree, but then they don't realize that that amounts sometimes to thousands of dollars over the course of the year. Of course, it works well here if you break it down into the smallest units. If you've done all this and the person is still saying no, then you want to look at the way that they word something. So let's say, for instance, that you're trying to convince someone to change something about a product that you're building together. You've asked and they've said, "I'm sorry, I've run this by my manager and I don't think that they're going to want to change their mind." You then look at what they've actually said and look for weak points and look for opportunities to continue that conversation and don't let it be shut down. Because they've actually said, A, they don't think, so they don't know, and B, they've demonstrated that they don't have the final say. So you can now say, in that case, could I please speak with your manager and put forward my point of view? Or you could say, well, could you just run it by them anyways, because I'd really like to find out. This is the great example of where being more willing to be socially awkward can help you to get the outcome you want. This is what we often perceive as someone being an alpha male or a type A personality, the willingness to trample on toes and to make other people feel slightly uncomfortable. There's a kind of social contract where when someone says that, you know they really mean no. But if you take advantage of their politeness, because most people don't want to just outright say no, if you take advantage of that and push further, they'll often relent because they've left themselves no opportunity. They haven't completely shut down that conversation. This isn't going to win you any friends, it's not a popular strategy. However, it will very often get you the outcome that you want.
Of course, speaking of willingness to be awkward and to break those social contracts, one of the classic techniques to use in any negotiation is silence. My mum, who worked in telesales, told me that the first to speak would very often be the loser in any negotiation. We have this natural urge to want to fill a silence because we find it awkward. That's when we start babbling, and it's often when we say, well, you know, maybe I could get you a little bit more money off. So don't give in to that urge. Use silences to your advantage, and you'll also come across as much more confident, and they will be trying to impress you rather than the other way around. See, awkward, isn't it?
In short, you want them to be agreeable, but you want to be not agreeable and be willing to be an awkward dick. And at the same time, be willing to walk away. If you're willing to walk away, if you're in a stronger position, then that often gives you the upper hand in negotiation.
If you're someone who finds it really hard to be awkward or rude, if you're naturally a people pleaser, I am, then I recommend you watch my video on CBT and employ some of those techniques such as the hypothesis testing and the thought analysis. This will help you to overcome that urge and to be awkward when you need to be. I will also say though, of course, that you should not misuse these skills once you've gained the ability to be alpha, because you know, no one likes a dick, and if you keep doing this kind of thing, then people aren't going to want to work with you. Only use it when it really is something important to you that you really need to win. Because ultimately, the very best way to get raises, to get your way, and to make people agreeable with you is just to be a good person. And I actually believe that good business is normally ethical business. If you provide a good service, if you're loyal, if you're honest, if you're on time, then for all the fun and the bombast of this video, that's actually the best way to get a raise, to get loyalty from your customers, and to get friends who will let you win the occasional argument. Most of my raises have come simply because I hand in my work on time and I try really hard. And smiling gets you a long way too.
Finally, if after all this negotiation, the person still says no, then don't see this as a loss, see it as an opportunity. So if you were going for a raise, we're using that example again, and they say, no, I'm really sorry, you can't have the raise, then you just say, that's fine. This is once you've tried every other option. You say, that's fine. Can I please have some feedback? And can you please let me know what I'd need to do in order to be worth that raise to you? How could I make myself worth that extra $2,000 a year? What else could I achieve? And by doing this, A, you get useful feedback, and B, they then tell you the criteria you need to fulfill in order to get that raise. If you then go away and you work on those things and you make sure to fulfill them, and then you come back and renegotiate, well, now it's going to be very difficult for them to say no because you've done exactly what they've asked. You've almost got a verbal contract that's going to result in you getting the outcome you want. Likewise, if you were negotiating with friends about where to go on holiday and they don't let you win, you end up going where they want, you just say then, well, in that case, what's the compromise for next time? Next time, how are you going to make up for this fact that I've lost out? So there you go, guys. I hope you found this useful and interesting. You can use this in business if you're self-employed. You can use it along with my gig economy advice, or you can use it in your line of work. And like I say, it also works in relationships. Always think about the best way to approach any discussion in order to get the outcome that you want. In future, I've said in the past that I'm going to talk about body language, likewise about persuasion and other aspects of psychological warfare. So if you think that sounds interesting, then thanks a ton for watching, subscribe down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.